Right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Forget the pristine, glowing Hollywood castles and the glamorous royalty we're all so used to seeing. We are going to strip all of that away to feel the real, gritty texture of the 14th and 15th centuries. We're going to look at how ordinary people and the elites who ruled over them actually survived, ate, and dressed on a daily basis. We are essentially reconstructing an entire human world from the ground up to see the true material engine that kept the Middle Ages running. So, before we can really understand this world, we have to ask ourselves a pretty fundamental question. What was the real currency of the Middle Ages? Because standardized coins, they were incredibly scarce for the average person. This reality led to a highly complex, high-stakes puzzle of bartering. The true currency of the day was grain, livestock, and raw materials. Literally, every single transaction was a matter of survival, deeply and inescapably tied to the land and the immediate physical resources available to a household.
Okay, Section 1, the architecture of society.
The concept of the three estates perfectly illustrates the ideal feudal baseline. It wasn't just some basic economic class system. It was a rigidly ordered world where everyone had a highly specific, inescapable role to play, a role they believed was literally mandated by God. You had those who fought, those who prayed, and then the vast, vast majority, those who worked the earth. It acted as a powerful psychological framework designed to keep everyone exactly in their lane, or well, at least it attempted to. You know what's actually wild? This rigid order even extended to time itself. The modern pressure of punctuality that we all feel today actually began in the Middle Ages with monks. Operating under the strict rule of all things in their proper time, monks were required to pray 6 to 8 times a day. And this incredibly strict adherence to a daily schedule ultimately led to the creation of mechanical clocks. A religious duty to avoid idleness directly birthed the very time consciousness that regulates all human labor today. It's fascinating. And for the knights sitting at the very top of that social ladder, maintaining their status was a massive, constant psychological burden. Joining a crusade, for example, wasn't merely about piety or religious fervor. It was a rigorous, terrifying social test. Staying behind meant severe moral stigma, deep suspicion, and total exclusion from the ruling class. So the pressure really cascaded downward. Faith might have opened the door, but it was the intense, absolutely inescapable honor culture of the nobility that pushed people through it.
Moving on to Section 2, the value of things.
To really grasp this era, we have to completely strip away our modern comforts. Imagine a moonless night. It would plunge the countryside into absolute pitch-black darkness. Just think about the sheer physical exhaustion of a peasant walking miles in the dark, navigating unpaved, rutted dirt roads just to reach a local market. This severe constraint on movement shaped everyday commerce, dictated exactly when people could work, and sharply defined the physical boundaries of their entire world. And those exact same treacherous dirt roads heavily restricted the elite too, because transporting heavy grain and ale over rough medieval terrain was just prohibitively expensive. Lords couldn't just sit in one central capital and have food delivered to them. Instead, they had to continuously move their entire massive households directly to the food supply. They were itinerant, traveling from estate to estate, eating all the local stores, packing up the whole operation, and moving again. But when the elite did manage to import goods, the costs were just astronomical. By looking at a 1339 ledger from the Clare estate, we can tangibly measure this elite wealth. Look at the top item there, 1,300 silver pennies spent on an Italian merchant's imported sugar loaves. To see them dropping hundreds of pence on things like black pepper and Malaga figs, it reveals a level of conspicuous consumption that completely, utterly separated them from the local agrarian economy. All right, Section 3, feasting and survival. The contrast here is just absolutely stark. On one hand, you have the peasants' desperate daily calorie gathering, literally surviving on pottage and dark bread. On the other, the noble's table is groaning under the weight of venison hunted from private, heavily restricted forests. The food sitting on a medieval plate instantly and loudly communicated your exact place in that divinely ordained hierarchy we talked about. Now, this is a crucial point. The number one daily expense for the average medieval person was actually malt for brewing. Because drinking water was often unsafe and unreliable, the ordinary peasant consumed small beer, which was a very low-alcohol, highly nutritious brew, for breakfast.
And they did this simply to get the safe, desperately needed calories required to survive a brutal day of manual labor.
Meanwhile, for the elite, sitting down to a meal served a totally different psychological function. Feasting wasn't just gluttony, it was a deeply political display of good lordship. By carefully managing these abundant resources and offering liberality to their guests, nobles proved to the church and to their rivals that they could successfully control their violent martial impulses and effectively govern a civilized society.
Which brings us to Section 4, the politics of fashion.
I absolutely love this complaint from the author Christine de Pizan. She is utterly outraged by the fabric-heavy fashion of quote-unquote ordinary women using the new super-wide bombard sleeves. It's so fascinating because it proves that older generations complaining about the outrageous, flashy fashion trends of younger, newly wealthy generations is a completely timeless human reaction.
But you see, this kind of anxiety over fashion actually became a literal matter of law. As economic growth made the middle class wealthier, cities panicked. In 1401, Bologna passed frantic sumptuary laws to legally ban commoners from wearing silk, velvet, or sleeves wider than 4 feet. The elites were terrified that if you couldn't instantly tell a noble from a commoner just by looking at their clothes, the entire social order would just collapse.
And these trends brilliantly capture the true psychology of medieval fashion. Trailing robes, giant sleeves, shoes with tips so incredibly long they had to be stiffened with wood just so you could walk. Wearing garments that physically restricted your movement was the ultimate flex. It was a way to publicly prove to everyone around you that you were so immensely wealthy, you never had to do a single day of manual labor in your life. Finally, Section 5, the tides of change. Perhaps the ultimate contradiction of this entire era was the merchant class. The clergy actively damned merchants as greedy usurers, parasites who defied God by pursuing personal gain and reselling goods instead of producing them. Yet the nobility absolutely, 100%, relied on these exact same merchants to supply the imported spices, silks, and armor they desperately needed to maintain their elite visual superiority. Because the messy reality on the ground was always more complex than the rigid laws. Everyday people constantly adapted and subverted the rules meant to control them, from adding simple chimneys to homes, which actually birthed the concept of the private bedroom and changed family dynamics forever, to commoners quietly dyeing their wool in bright, restricted colors. The material world was rapidly evolving from the bottom up. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider this. The medieval elite tried absolutely everything to strictly regulate identity, consumption, and status through rigid laws and religious decrees. But at the end of the day, they failed to contain human ambition. Can laws ever truly override the deep-seated social and psychological drivers of human desire? It really makes you wonder, how much does their ancient struggle to control wealth and outward appearance mirror our own ongoing relationship with status, luxury, and social class today?